This is not the way our ancestors decreed.
We must forge our own path now. You will not... Do not take him!
This is our son!
He belongs with me!
Once, the village of Marula had been a place of laughter. The fields were golden with harvest. Children ran barefoot through the grass, and songs rose from every home. But those days were now memories fading, fragile, and almost painful to recall. The king's hand had grown heavy on the people. His greed reached into every corner of their lives. Each season, he demanded more grain, more livestock, more coin, so much that the people had little left to eat themselves. Men who once carried plows now bent beneath sacks of taxes. Women who once wove bright cloths now traded their garments for scraps of bread. The king lived far away in his stone palace, but his shadow reached across the land. He was ruthless, a man who measured worth only in gold. Those who fell behind in their payments were not simply fined, they were shamed, beaten, or dragged away by his soldiers. No one spoke of justice anymore. They spoke only of survival. Yet even survival was slipping through their fingers. Families sold their fields. Fathers left to find work in distant lands, never returning. Mothers grew thin, their faces hollow as they tried to feed their children before themselves. Hunger became a constant guest at every table, sitting heavy and unwelcome. And still, the king demanded more. Among the whispers of despair, small sparks of anger began to glow. In hushed tones, by candlelight, villagers spoke of rebellion, but each time the thought rose, fear smothered it. The king's spies were everywhere, watching, listening. One careless word could bring ruin on an entire household. And so the people swallowed their anger and bowed their heads. But not all. Hearts bent so easily. Amara was different. She was the daughter of a widow. Her father long lost to the wars that had once fattened the king's coffers. Life had not been gentle with her, but she carried herself with a quiet strength. While others lowered their eyes, Amara looked people in the face. Her dark eyes burned with a courage the village had nearly forgotten. Every morning, Amara helped her mother draw water, their clay jars heavy against their arms. She cared for children while weary mothers worked the fields. When food was scarce, she shared what little they had. Her kindness made her beloved. But it was her spirit that made her unforgettable. It was said that even in the harshest times, she found ways to smile. That smile was not born of foolishness but of defiance, a refusal to let despair win. To the villagers, she was hope wrapped in human form. Though she never claimed to be more than a simple girl, her beauty was not the polished kind of jewels and perfumes. It was the raw beauty of strength, skin kissed by the sun, hair that coiled like dark rivers, and eyes that spoke more than words could. People said the king had heard of her through his spies. They whispered that her spirit had caught his attention, and that a man who devoured everything he saw would not ignore her for long. The thought chilled the village. To be chosen by the king was not an honor. It was a curse dressed in gold. And though Amara had not yet faced him, she felt the weight of his gaze from afar, as though the air itself had grown heavier around her. Her mother Nia worried in silence. She knew the cruelty of men like the king. She had raised Amara to be strong, but strength could be dangerous in a world ruled by greed. Many nights, Nia lay awake, staring into the darkness, wondering how she could protect her only child from a power that crushed even the bravest hearts. Meanwhile, the king continued his rule. In his palace, draped with silks and filled with gold, he cared nothing for the cries of his people. His eyes were always on more land, more treasure, more power. And now, whispers said, on Amara, the village did not yet know how quickly their quiet suffering would turn into fire. They did not yet see how Amara's defiance would test their loyalties, split their homes, and bring the wrath of the king upon them all. But the winds were already shifting. The story of a greedy king and a fearless girl had begun, and nothing could stop it now. The morning came with a silence that felt unnatural. Birds that usually sang from the trees had vanished. The air was thick, as if the earth itself held its breath. Then came the sound hooves, striking the dirt road, heavy boots marching in rhythm, the sharp clang of weapons against armor. The king had arrived. His procession stretched like a dark river down the hill. Soldiers in gleaming helmets, banners bearing his crest, and horses draped in crimson cloth. At the center rode the king himself, seated high upon a black stallion, his cloak embroidered with golden thread that caught the sun. To the hungry villagers, the sight of such wealth was almost blinding mockery in physical form. The people gathered in the square, their faces pale with fear. Mothers clutched their children tightly. Farmers stood with heads bowed, their hands trembling. Some villagers whispered that perhaps this visit meant mercy, though in their hearts they knew better. The king dismounted with a smile that did not reach his eyes. His voice was smooth, carrying the practiced charm of a man used to bending others to his will. "My people," he said, spreading his arms as though he brought them blessings instead of suffering. "I have heard much of your village. I have heard of its beauty, and of a flower that grows here, rare and unmatched." His gaze swept the crowd until it settled on Amara. The hush that followed was heavy, almost suffocating. Every eye turned toward her. Amara stood tall, though her heart pounded in her chest. She had known this day might come, but knowing did not soften the blow. Her mother's hand gripped her arm tightly, as if trying to anchor her in place. The king stepped closer, his smile sharpened like the edge of a blade. "They speak of you, girl. They say your spirit burns brighter than the sun. I have come to see it for myself." He paused, letting the words hang before delivering his decree. "You will be my queen." Gasps rippled through the crowd. Some villagers dropped to their knees, seeing this as salvation. To them, Amara's marriage to the king could mean protection, lighter taxes, even wealth. Others pressed their lips tight in dread, knowing what it meant to be claimed by a man of such greed. Naya's knees weakened. She clutched her daughter's hand, eyes wide with terror. Refusal, she knew, could mean ruin for them all. But her daughter's spirit was not one that could be caged. Amara raised her chin, her voice steady though her body trembled. "I will not marry you." The square seemed to tilt, as though the ground itself recoiled from her words. Her refusal was a spark in dry grass, small, but enough to set everything aflame. The king's smile froze. For a moment, silence pressed down on everyone. Then, he laughed. It was not the laughter of joy, but of cruelty, a sound that made the villagers' skin crawl. "You misunderstand," he said smoothly, though his eyes had darkened. "This is not a request. It is an honor I bestow upon you." Amara's voice grew louder, reaching even those at the edges of the crowd. "What honor is there in marrying a man who feasts while children starve? What honor is there in binding myself to a king who drains the life from his own people?" The villagers gasped again, some in awe of her courage, others in horror at her boldness. Nia's tears fell silently, torn between pride and fear. The king stepped closer, his shadow falling over Amara. He bent his head so only she and those nearest could hear. His words were soft, but they carried the weight of a threat sharpened over years of cruelty. "You are brave," he said. "But bravery has a price. Think carefully, girl. Your refusal does not wound MIT wounds them." He gestured toward the crowd. "Every family, every child, every elder, their lives hang on your answer." The smile returned to his lips, polished and false. He turned back to the villagers, spreading his arms as if addressing a gathering of loyal subjects. "You have witnessed it yourselves. She has spoken. She would rather see your suffering continue than take her place at my side. Still, I am merciful. I will give her time to reconsider." With a wave of his hand, the soldiers pulled back, though their eyes burned with malice. The king mounted his stallion once more, his cloak glimmering in the fading sunlight. "Until then," he said, his voice echoing through the square, "let her refusal be your burden. Remember, her defiance is the reason for what follows." The procession departed, leaving the village in silence broken only by the sound of muffled sobs. Some villagers looked at Amara with admiration, others with blame. Her refusal had been pure and brave, yet it carried the weight of consequences none could yet imagine. Naya held her daughter close, her heart pounding like a drum. She whispered desperately, "What have you done, child?" Amara's answer was steady, though her throat ached with unshed tears. "I did what was right." The village did not yet know that these words would divide them, testing their loyalties and tearing at the fragile threads that bound them together. But the king had left them with a promise and a warning. His smile hid rage, and rage was something the village would soon taste. The king's words hung over the village like a storm cloud that would not pass. Days after his departure, the people still felt his presence in the air, as if the dust of his soldiers' boots lingered in their throats. At first, there was silence. Families returned to their homes with heavy steps, too stunned to speak. But silence cannot hold forever. Soon, the square, the fields, and the narrow paths of the village filled with voices sharp with anger, heavy with fear, trembling with confusion. Some praised Amara. "Did you not hear her? She stood against him like no one else ever has. She is the only one among us with the courage to speak truth. They spoke her name with reverence, as though she had become a shield for them all. But others spat her name like poison. She has doomed us. Does she think her pride will feed our children? When the king strikes, it will be our backs that bear the whip, all because of her defiance. The division deepened quickly. Neighbors who once shared bread now turned away from each other. Friends who had grown up side by side argued in the streets. At night, families whispered behind closed doors, their words carrying through thin walls and reaching hungry ears. The village was breaking, not by the king's soldiers but by the seeds of mistrust sown in every heart. Amara felt the weight of it all. When she walked to the well, some villagers stepped aside with nods of respect. Others refused to meet her gaze, muttering under their breath. Children, who once followed her with laughter, now pulled back at their parents' warning looks. She carried herself with dignity, but inside she felt the sting of isolation. Her mother, Naya, watched with aching eyes. Pride swelled in her chest when she remembered her daughter's bold stand, but fear coiled around her heart. She knew the king's cruelty. He would not forget. Amara, she whispered each night as they lay in their small hut, you are strong, but strength draws fire. I fear for you. I fear for us all. The king's grip tightened as the days passed. Soldiers returned, demanding more taxes, stripping grain from the storerooms, taking goats and chickens from those who had little left to give. Punishments grew harsher. Those who begged for mercy were beaten in front of their families. Fear wrapped the village like chains, and with each lash of cruelty, more villagers looked to Amara with resentment. It is her fault, they muttered. The king punishes us because of her. If she had bowed her head, we might have been spared. And yet, in the shadows, whispers of admiration also spread. Did you see how she faced him? Not even the elders dared to raise their voices. But she stood unshaken. If she can stand, perhaps we can too. Amara became both a beacon and a burden. To some, she was hope. To others, she was the flame that would burn them alive. The village's gatherings turned into battlegrounds of words. One evening, the people gathered in the square to discuss the king's demands. The arguments rose like thunder. She has brought this upon us, shouted a man with sunken cheeks. If she marries him, he will show mercy. Do you want your children to starve, and you would see her thrown to the wolf? Another countered, his voice shaking with anger. Would you sacrifice her spirit just to buy yourself another season of misery? His greed will never end, with or without her. Shouts overlapped. The crowd split into two circles, glaring at each other with eyes full of fire. Words turned into insults, and insults into threats. Mothers pulled their children close, as the night thickened with hostility. Through it all, Amara stood silent at the edge of the crowd. Her hands trembled at her sides, but her jaw was firm. She saw the faces of her people, twisted by fear and hunger, and her heart ached. She had spoken truth, but truth had torn them apart. When the gathering ended, the villagers scattered into the darkness, the rift between them wider than ever. The once close village was now a house divided, with walls built from anger and despair. And high above, in the palace, miles away, the king smiled as reports reached him. He needed no sword to weaken them. The girl's defiance had done his work for him. All he had to do now was wait, and their village would crumble from within. The days after the village's division brought no peace. Word of Amara's defiance had spread through the king's court, twisted and sharpened by his spies. By the time the story reached his ears, it had become a tale of mockery, a simple village girl daring to stand against a king. His pride, already swollen with greed, burned with rage. He would not be defied, so he struck. At dawn, soldiers stormed the village with thunderous force. Doors were torn from their hinges, storerooms emptied, homes ripped apart as men and women cried out in horror. Goats were dragged from their pens, chickens seized, grain scooped into sacks and loaded onto wagons. What little the villagers had left was swallowed by the king's endless hunger. But it was not enough. The soldiers, acting on his command, beat those who dared to resist. An old farmer who tried to shield his wife was struck down in the dirt. A mother who clung to her child's bread was lashed until her back ran red. The air filled with screams, and the ground with dust and blood. Fear twisted into fury within Amara. She could not stand idle. While soldiers marched from house to house, she moved through the shadows, helping families hide what scraps of food they could. She tucked bread into children's pockets, slipped coins into calloused hands, and guided neighbors toward cellars and hidden stores. Her defiance did not go unnoticed. To the starving, she was a savior. To the fearful, she was a curse. She only makes it worse, some whispered. The more she resists, the harsher they strike. Yet others clung to her bravery like drowning men grasping for rope. Naya watched with trembling hands as her daughter risked everything. Amara, she begged one night, her voice breaking, they will kill you if they see. Please, child, think of yourself. But Amara shook her head, eyes burning with resolve. If I do nothing, mother, then we are already dead. Her words rang true, but they weighed heavy on Nia's heart. By the third raid, the village was on its knees. Families had nothing left to give, yet the king's demands grew louder. The soldiers began dragging men from their homes, forcing them into servitude, leaving their wives and children to weep. It was clear to all, this was no punishment to end in a day. This was the beginning of the king's wrath. And it would not stop until the people were broken. At last, Amara was summoned. The soldiers came at dusk, their armor glinting in the fading light. The villagers gathered in the square, silent and trembling. As Amara was brought forward, the captain's voice boomed. The king demands her presence. She is to be taken to him at once. Naya clung to her daughter, her cries echoing through the stillness. But Amara stood firm. If it is me he wants, she said softly to her mother, then let it be me. I will not bow, no matter what he offers. The journey to the palace was long and filled with dread. Yet when Amara stood before the king, she felt no fear, only anger. He sat upon a throne carved with gold, jewels glittering on every finger, his robes heavy with embroidery. Around him lay treasures stolen from countless villages, wealth piled high while his people starved. He regarded her with a smile that chilled the blood. So, he said, the little flame refuses to die. You could end their suffering with a single word, Amara, one vow, one marriage, and your people will be spared. All the pain, all the hunger gone. You could be their savior. Amara's hands trembled, but her voice was steady. Their suffering is because of you. To marry you would not save them, it would bind me to their chains. I will not. The smile slipped, his eyes hardened into steel. Then watch as they burn. With a wave of his hand, soldiers dragged villagers into the hall, men, women, even children, their faces pale with terror. They cried out, calling for mercy, for freedom. The king's voice thundered over their cries. This is your choice, Amara. Speak the word, and they live. Stay silent, and their blood will stain the earth. The hall fell into silence, every breath waiting on hers. Tears welled in Amara's eyes. Her heart ached at the sight of her people trembling, innocent lives caught in the claws of a monster. Yet even as her spirit cracked under the weight, her voice did not falter. I will not marry you. Gasps tore through the crowd. The king's face twisted with fury, his hand striking the arm of his throne. So be it, he roared. Their suffering shall be your legacy. The soldiers dragged the villagers away, their cries echoing down the corridors. Amara's knees nearly buckled, but she forced herself to stand tall. She knew what her defiance would cost, but surrender would have cost far more. That night, as the fires of punishment burned in the village, Amara's name was spoken in whispers, some in praise, others in hatred. To some she was a hero, to others the bringer of doom. But one truth was clear: the king's wrath had only begun, and the price of her defiance was one the entire village would pay. The village, once bound by kinship and shared struggle, now bore scars deeper than hunger. The raids had stripped not only food and freedom, but hope itself. Families huddled in ashes of burned homes, children crying themselves to sleep, elders fading with empty stomachs. Every dawn brought more soldiers, more cruelty, more punishment, and the people began to whisper. At first, the whispers were thin and fleeting. If only she had said yes, if only she had yielded. Then louder, we suffer because of her pride. Because of one girl, the king's fury falls on us all. Amara walked among them, shoulders straight but heartbreaking at every turned face. Neighbors who once shared their bread now shut their doors at her passing. Mothers pulled their children closer, as though her shadow itself carried misfortune. Nia saw it, tooth of bitterness, the way eyes lingered on her daughter with resentment. She wept at night, torn between pride and fear. Child, she whispered, I know your heart is pure, but the people, they are drowning. And grief can turn even the kindest into enemies. Her warning soon proved true. One evening, the elders called a secret gathering beneath the withered tree at the village's edge. Amara was not invited, but the murmurs carried through the night like wind through broken reeds. Voices rose with desperation, then anger, then resolve. By dawn, the betrayal took shape. The soldiers arrived with a strange urgency, no longer scouring the homes, but moving with purpose. Amara's stomach turned cold when she saw the familiar faces, leading them the same villagers she had saved with hidden scraps of food, the same elders who once praised her courage. Now they pointed to her with trembling hands, offering her name as though it were a weapon. "There," they cried, "take her. She is the cause. End this torment and spare us." Amara's breath caught, her heart crushed under the weight of their voices. She wanted to scream, to ask how they could turn so quickly, but her words died in her throat. She saw their hollow eyes, their children clinging to rags, and she understood. Hunger had stolen their loyalty. Fear had broken their bonds. The soldiers seized her, dragging her through the dirt as the villagers watched. Some turned away, ashamed. Others stared, silent and unblinking, as though convincing themselves it was mercy. Naya fell to her knees, clutching at the soldiers' boots. "Please," she sobbed. "Please, not my daughter. Take me instead." But they pushed her aside, her cries lost in the thundering hooves that carried Amara away. In the palace, the king received her with cruel satisfaction. "At last," he said, voice thick with triumph, "even your own people betray you. What loyalty remains to fight for now?" Amara, bruised and bloodied, lifted her chin. "They are broken by your hand, not mine. If they turned against me, it is because you left them no choice. You rule with chains, not love. And one day, even chains will break." The king's laughter echoed through the gilded hall. "You speak of chains, little flame, yet you are bound tighter than any. Your sacrifice will be their salvation, though they are too foolish to see it." He ordered her thrown into the dungeon, where shadows stretched like endless claws. The stone walls dripped with cold, the air reeked of despair, and yet Amara felt a strange calm. Betrayed by those she loved, she now bore her burden alone. Still, she would not regret her choice. Better to suffer for Defiance than to live as a jewel in a tyrant's crown. But outside those walls, her sacrifice weighed heavily. Nia wandered the village, her grief a wound that would not close. Some villagers felt guilt gnawing at them, haunted by the memory of her courage, ashamed of the price they forced her to pay. Others hardened their hearts, insisting it was necessary for survival. Yet, in the silence of the night, children whispered her name with reverence, calling her the girl who would not bow. And though the king believed her broken, Amara's spirit burned quietly in the dark. The betrayal had cut her deeply, but it also planted a seed, a fire not of pride, but of sacrifice, one that might yet ignite something greater than her village's fear. For even as the people turned from her, destiny had not. The palace walls were built to impress and to intimidate. Marble floors shone like still water, golden pillars stretched high as if touching the heavens, and servants hurried about with eyes fixed to the ground. Yet for Amara, every jewel, every shimmering curtain, every dish overflowing with food, felt like a knife against her heart. She had been stripped of her simple village dress and clothed in silks, heavy with embroidery. Gold circlets pressed against her arms, chains of rubies adorned her neck. To others, she might have looked like a queen, but to Amara, it was a costume, an attempt to bury her beneath wealth she did not want. The king visited often, striding into her chamber with the swagger of one who believed everything could be bought. He placed before her treasures from faraway lands, diamonds that sparkled like captured stars, robes dyed in the rarest colors, goblets of wine sweeter than honey. "All this can be yours," he said smoothly. "If you accept your place at my side, you will never know hunger, never feel fear again. The people will bow to you, and your name will live in glory." But Amara's eyes, steady and clear, never softened. "What use is glory?" she answered. "If it is built on the suffering of others, your riches mean nothing while children starve outside your walls." Her words pierced him, though he masked it with laughter. The king, who had conquered villages and silenced men with a glance, could not bend the will of one young woman. Her refusal did not weaken his desire, inflamed it. He no longer wanted her only as a wife. He wanted her spirit crushed, her fire extinguished. Days passed, then weeks. Amara was not kept in chains, but her freedom was an illusion. Guards stood at every door, and windows looked out over walls too high to climb. Yet in this gilded prison, she found eyes watching her servants, slaves, guards who lived in silence and fear. One evening, as she was escorted to the banquet hall, she passed a group of servants scrubbing the floor. Their hands were raw from endless labor, their faces hollow with exhaustion. Amara slowed, meeting their eyes. For a moment, they lifted their heads, just a flicker of curiosity, of recognition. She gave them the smallest smile, a quiet gesture of strength. and then moved on. That smile was enough. In the kitchens whispers began. She does not bow. She does not break. Among the guards, stories spread. She defies him even when surrounded by gold. To the slaves who had long forgotten hope, her very presence became a reminder that the king's power was not absolute. One night, a young servant girl slipped into Amara's chamber, under the pretense of delivering water. Her voice trembled as she whispered, "They say you are unafraid. Is it true?" Amara looked at her with gentle eyes. "I am afraid," she admitted softly, "but fear does not own me. I choose what I bow to, and I will never bow to greed." The girl's lips parted, as though she had been handed a secret she never thought she would hear. From then on, more servants found excuses to linger near Amara, to catch her words, to draw strength from the flame she carried quietly in her chest. Meanwhile, in the village, rumors trickled back like streams cutting through dry land. Travelers and merchants carried news. Amara had not given in. She wore the king's jewels, but refused his crown. She lived in his palace, but had not bent her spirit at first. The villagers dismissed the tales as foolish hope, but as the whispers grew, so did the guilt. Parents who once cursed her name began to soften. Neighbors who had betrayed her felt shame bite deeper. Could it be that the girl they gave away was still fighting, even for them? By the fireside, in hushed tones, the people began to speak differently. Not of fear, but of possibility. Not of survival, but of freedom. The king believed he had torn Amara from her people, but he had only planted her in richer soil. Her defiance spread quietly, like roots beneath the earth, hidden, steady, unstoppable. The seeds of rebellion had been sown, and soon they would grow. The palace dungeons were cold and damp, yet Amara carried herself as though she were walking beneath open skies. Chains rattled at her ankles, but her spirit remained unbound. Other prisoners watched her with weary eyes, men and women who had long surrendered to despair. But when Amara knelt beside them, speaking softly of courage, something stirred. "We are not powerless," she whispered. "Even in darkness, a flame can live." And flames spread. Her words, simple yet steady, lit sparks in hearts that had forgotten how to hope. Servants who brought food to her cell carried those sparks back through the palace corridors. Guards, hardened by years of cruelty, began to wonder if loyalty to a greedy king was worth more than loyalty to their people. Beyond the walls, rumors poured into the village like wind before a storm. Merchants carried the tale. "Amara refuses to break." They spoke of how she turned away gold, how she comforted captives, how even in chains her voice carried strength. Thought the villagers, once divided by fear and bitterness, began to see themselves reflected in her defiance. Mothers remembered her kindness. Fathers remembered her boldness. Children whispered her name as though it were a shield. Guilt spread like wildfire. Those who had betrayed her could no longer silence the ache in their hearts. They saw the truth at last. Surrendering Amara had not saved them. The king's greed only grew, and no amount of obedience could ever satisfy him. One evening, around the village fires, an elder spoke what many had been too afraid to say. "We thought survival was enough, but survival under chains is not living. Amara fights still leaven for us. Will we let her stand alone?" The silence that followed was heavy, broken only by the sound of crackling flames. Then, one by one, voices rose. No more. The village that had once been split by fear began to weave itself together again, bound now by courage and shame transformed into resolve. Men sharpened old farming tools into weapons. Women prepared food and bandages. Even children gathered stones and whispered prayers. In the palace, the king feasted, believing victory was already his. He did not see the tide shifting. He did not feel the ground trembling beneath him. But Amara felt it. Even in her cell, she sensed it, the change in the air. The strength growing like a drumbeat carried on the wind. The people were rising. And this time, they would not bow. The night was thick with silence, but beneath it pulsed the heartbeat of 1,000 footsteps. Torches flickered across the dark fields as villagers gathered, farmers clutching sharpened hoes, blacksmiths wielding hammers, mothers gripping staffs carved from wood. What bound them together was not strength of arms, but strength of will. Amara's name burned in every whisper. For her, for us. The palace loomed ahead, its walls high and crowned with guards. For years, those walls had symbolized untouchable power. But tonight, the people did not tremble. Tonight, the people surged. The first cry tore through the night, a raw shout of defiance. Stones flew, torches lit the sky, and the palace gates shook under the force of the mob. Soldiers rushed forward, armored and armed with steel. Yet for the first time, they met opponents who did not scatter. The villagers fought with desperation, with memory, with a hunger for freedom that no blade could cut down. Inside, Amara heard the chaos. Chains still bound her wrists, but her heart leaped. "They've come," she breathed, eyes shining with fire. The guard outside her cell shifted uneasily, torn between duty and conscience. At last, he fumbled with his keys, whispering, "Oh, lead them." Amara burst into the open air, rushing through smoke and fire to the clash outside. The villagers' faces lit up when they saw her, their courage doubling. She did not run from the fight, she ran into it. Standing at the front beside her people, the king appeared on the palace steps, draped in gold, his crown gleaming in the firelight. His voice thundered above the chaos. "Fools, do you think you can defy me? I am your ruler, your master. Baobor be destroyed." But the people no longer listened. Amara stepped forward, her voice steady, carrying above the din. "You are no master. You are a thief who fed on the lives of your people. We bow no more." Her words struck harder than any weapon. The villagers roared in agreement. Pressing forward, the soldiers hesitated, looking to their king for orders, but doubt flickered in their eyes. They saw the people's unity. They saw Amara standing unbroken. And slowly, one by one, they lowered their swords. The king's face twisted with rage. "Traitors, all of you." He reached for his blade, but even his own men stepped back. His power, once absolute, crumbled before him not by bloodshed, but by abandonment. Amara lifted her chained wrists high. "You are nothing without the people." And in that moment, the king knew he had lost. His soldiers melted away, leaving him alone before the crowd he had once ruled with fear. The villagers surged forward, tearing down the golden banners, casting aside the symbols of his greed. The palace that had stood as a monument to oppression now shook with the cries of freedom. Amara did not take the throne, nor did she claim power. She walked among her people, chains still hanging from her arms, but her spirit shining brighter than any crown. The battle was over. The king was finished, and the people, at last, were free. The palace that had once glimmered like a monument to greed now stood broken and silent. Its gates were torn down, its banners burned to ash. For the first time in years, the night over the village was not filled with fear, but with the sound of laughter, tears, and voices lifted in relief. The king had been stripped of his crown, his robes of gold torn from his shoulders. Alone and trembling, he was cast out beyond the village walls. No guards, no servants, no riches to shield him. He stumbled into the wilderness, a man reduced to nothing more than flesh and bone. His empire of fear had vanished in a single night. The people, though victorious, bore the weight of scars. Families mourned those lost in the struggle. Homes had been ransacked, fields left untended. Yet, beneath the grief ran a stronger current hope. For the first time in living memory, the village belonged to the villagers. Amara stood at the heart of it all, not as a queen, not as a ruler, but as one of them. Her wrists still bore the bruises of chains, yet she carried herself with quiet strength. Wherever she walked, heads bowed not out of fear, but out of love and respect. Her mother pushed through the crowd, her face streaked with tears. She caught Amara in her arms, holding her as though she were a child again. "My daughter," she whispered, voice trembling with pride. "You were the light when all else was dark." Amara clung to her, her own tears spilling freely. For a moment, the weight of sacrifice, betrayal, and courage all came crashing down. But within her mother's embrace, it became bearable. In the days that followed, the villagers worked together to rebuild what had been broken. Fields were cleared and sown again. Walls were repaired, not to keep people out, but to protect what they had chosen to share. Council meetings replaced decrees. Every voice counted. And justice was no longer bought with gold but guided by fairness. Amara was offered power many times. "Lead us," they begged. "Be our queen." But she shook her head gently each time. "I will walk beside you, not above you. Freedom is not mine alone. To God it belongs to all of us." And so she became something greater than a queen. She became a symbol, a reminder that courage could outlast fear, that unity could heal division, and that even the smallest flame could outshine the darkest night as seasons turned. Stories of her defiance traveled beyond the village, carried by travelers and sung in marketplaces. Children grew up hearing her name as a lesson in strength and sacrifice. And though time softened many wounds, her example never faded. One evening, as the sun set in a sky painted with gold and crimson, Amara stood with her mother on the edge of the fields. The wind carried the laughter of children, the rhythm of hammers building new homes, the voices of neighbors working side by side. Her mother touched her hand. Do you see, Amara? This is the true crown you have given your people. Amara smiled, her gaze lingering on the horizon. Not a crown, she said softly, a future. And with that, the story closed, not with riches or thrones, but with a village reborn. The true wealth of the people lay not in gold, but in courage, unity, and freedom.